Hello and welcome to the All of God's Daughters channel. I haven't been posting on YouTube for quite some time, and it's a long story that I'd like to do a video on because I learned so much after my operation. In my last video I also spoke about the operation and the complications afterwards and the things that I struggled with, and I would like to do a video on that. But for me now, most important is starting with the series that I wanted to continue with or start with in continuing in my Preparing for Marriage series is a book called Total Woman, and I'm just going to take a few chapters. It's not in the public domain yet, that will be still a few years. It was published in the 70s, and I don't condone everything that the book says. There's a lot of good practical advice in this book, and I have read this book 3 times. I also own 3 copies. I do have the translation, so if maybe you read the book at some stage and you read the English version and you notice that some words are different, it's just because I'm working from the translation. And I'm going to start with a chapter, or 4 chapters actually, that's just basically the 4 A's. And the first one is accept him, and that is the chapter that I will be doing today, but I will also just be introducing you to the other chapters. So this is part 2 of the book, and it's called Total Man, if I'm translating that correctly. Number 2 is admire him. And number 6 is adapt to him. Did I say number 3 or number 6? It's chapter 6, but it's number 3. And then the last one is to appreciate him. So let's go back to part 2, chapter 4. So let's start with accept him. Now, Marabel Morgan speaks about what she did, and she says, like many other women, she entered a marriage trying to change her spouse. And I think that this is something that men also do at times, where we have this idea of who our spouse should be, and then we try to start shaping them into this image that we have. And I think that it is well-intentioned. The deal, and it's supposed to be this way, is that if you marry this person, you genuinely love them and you want what's best for them. So we take our ideas and our emotions and however we feel they should be, and we start imposing it on them. I made a little note for myself at the top of this chapter, and this is to give your husband over to the Lord. So basically, let the Holy Spirit do the work. How can we know what's best for our husbands? We can't. We will never know. We can maybe have a feeling or an intuition, or maybe we are really convinced that this is who he should be, this is how he should be acting. But because we are not God, and we never will be God, we can never claim that what we think and what we imagine our husbands to be is who he should be. That is God's work. And we should step aside and let God do the work. I don't know if it's the motherly nature in women who wants to see people grow, who wants to nurture something and see it flourish. I don't know. That's maybe why we have this inclination as women. I know men do this too. I can't speak for them. A husband does something, and we look into the future and we say, this thing is going to cause trouble, and we start working on it instead of praying about it. And so I think that when it comes to accepting our husband, we should start with prayer, with knowing who we are. We are not God. We cannot change our husbands. We don't even know where to begin. And the vision or the image of the idea that we have probably is wrong, simply because we are not God. I'm not saying that God can't give us a vision for how to help our husbands. I'm just saying that this is probably an area best left to God. Okay, so I'm going to start reading through what Marabel Morgan said. So she says that we start working on our husbands like a piece of pottery. And we start chipping away this piece and getting this piece nice and smooth, and we try to change him into how we think he should look. And I think that to some degree this is inevitable. I'm not saying that there will be no changes in your husband after he marries. That will actually just show that he might be a bit stubborn, and also that he never learned how to compromise, and maybe selfishness. So I'm not saying that he will never change. I'm just saying that you shouldn't have this idea and this, it shouldn't motivate you to think that you're going to fix him. And the thing is, when we do this to our husbands, they retract. And some of them react. It depends on how passive. So maybe he's a little more passive aggressive. So he would just slowly move away from you, close up a bit, not be as open as he used to be, not as kind as he used to be, because he's actually trying to protect himself. It's a defense mechanism. And other men will react with anger, and they will lash back at you or try and hurt you so that you would stop hurting them, because then you would also see that you are just as flawed as they are. Both techniques don't really work. So the best thing to do is to just not do this. Give your husband over to God. You can pray for him. And of course, if your husband is sinning or if he is doing something that is hurting you, yes, you can talk to him about that. But if he looks like this and you decide that you need to look like this, and you're constantly pushing him to this and constantly criticizing who he is, that won't work. That will cause a lot of trouble in your marriage. And this is something that we want to avoid at all costs, along with a lot of other things that we don't want to do in marriage. But this is a big one, because you're basically rejecting him. You're basically telling him that you are not enough for me. You're not a good man. That's very painful. If he had to do that with you, that would hurt just as much. So if we can just put ourselves in their shoes, then we would see why this is not a good idea. This is not healthy for a relationship. So let's continue. Just like anybody else, women, men, everybody, we're looking for somebody to accept us. And marriage is supposed to be a safe space. This is the space where we should actually have this guarantee that we will have love when we get home. So if we withhold love, and withholding love can also mean giving criticism for things that are not necessarily sin. So the flaws, the tendencies, the characteristics that our husbands have, if we reject them, if we constantly try to change them into a different man, I'm not saying that we should accept sin, not at all. I'm saying that we should accept who our husbands are, and also acknowledge that it's God's work to change him, not ours. So we're looking to give him genuine love. And to be honest, we want this in our friendships. We want this in the relationship between ourselves and our parents. This is actually just a healthy type of relationship. If somebody's constantly pointing out how wrong you are and how bad you're doing, imagine you are working and you have a boss that calls you in every day and says, listen, we need to have a chat. And this boss has this list, even if it's just a mental list, and he's going down this list. And he's telling you, okay, so you're going to start looking for a different job very soon. You won't last there very long. Emotionally, mentally, your health won't last. It's not a good thing. There are times, there are seasons, there are the right moments for sin, to talk about sin, things that really hurt you, but things that you just don't like as much as you would have liked this. That's not what we want to do. Okay, so we have to think of our husbands as our friends. So the Bible talks a lot about nagging. So this is basically when you go to your husband and you either tell him what he's doing wrong, or you tell him what he still needs to do, or what he hasn't been doing, or he hasn't been doing good enough. I can give you an example. So let's say you asked your husband to take out the trash. I never ask my husband to take out the trash. Maybe it's because I forget. I always forget what day the trash needs to go out. So my husband is really good at remembering this. But in any way, he has it on his list if he has something like that. Maybe he's the type of husband that appreciates a reminder, know your audience. But what I'm saying is that, let's say you decided that he needs to take the trash out at 6, but he decided that he's going to take the trash out at 8. And it's still fine, because the trash will only be taken away at 9. So he has a different schedule, a different plan. He wants the trash out at 8. And he has a lot of other things that he's lined up to do in the morning before he starts working. Now you decide it needs to be out at 6. So you constantly go to your husband and you're like, hey, the trash. And then you leave him for a few minutes and you're like, hey, the trash. That will drive a man insane. Let's say he has a problem. Let's say he takes very long to make a decision. But he's actually currently working on having a really difficult time to have a constant prayer life. Now he's struggling with this thing. And this is also the thing that God is working with. Or together, they are working with this thing, him and God. They're figuring this thing out. And you come and you are bugging him about something else. that can give him divided attention. I'm not saying to never mention it, but let's say you decided that you're only willing to live with this flaw that he has for about a week. And I think that sounds crazy, but sometimes we are that impatient. So let's say you say, okay, I'm going to give him a week to figure this thing out, because there's a decision that needs to be made. And then you say things like, oh, you're so slow sometimes. Like, don't you think that there can be a lot of bad consequences? It doesn't always have to be the same thing that you're saying. You can have different ways of trying to mold him, basically. And God might be working with something completely different. And now he's not actually making progress in his prayer life, and that might be the answer to the problem that you currently have. So yes, help your husband. Pray, ask him, how can I help you? Is there anything that you need my help with? Many times he will say, pray for me, or he will ask directly, can you help me remember this and this and that? Or, I would like to eat at this time of day. That would really help me to get to these tasks that you have asked me to do. So I think that it's not that we never have this conversation with our husband. It's just that it's not our focus. We don't nag. We leave him to God. And if he forgets something and you have time, just do it for him. I mean, I don't like taking out the trash. I have short arms. I'm a short woman. So I end up having the trash bags rubbing against my knees, and I just don't like that because they just feel so dirty. My husband is very tall, so he can keep the trash bag far from him, never touching his body, which is ideal. So when it comes to the trash, that's probably something that I won't do. But I asked him to fix one of our machines, and he was very busy at the time, and I found a moment where, I had some free time, and I Googled, and I found out some basic electricity information. I wouldn't do this with something more complex, and I fixed the wires. It was just a wire issue. I have bunnies and they ate the wires. So I fixed that so that we can use the machine again. And I asked my husband, and I waited about 2 weeks, and I noticed, what, he isn't able to do this. And when he got back from work, he was surprised and very thankful because I pushed the machine out into the middle of the living room and I was fixing it. So just I want to say being mature enough, not that I always am able to do this. Yes, I fail. I think that, sometimes we have this idea that once I know what is the right thing to do, that I'll continually do it, always, in every situation, which is not the truth. We sometimes have this tendency to fall back to what is bad, and we have to fight against that. Anyway. So we can think of our husbands as our friend. How would you want your friend to approach you, to ask you for favors, to treat you? And we don't want to nag. We don't want to be sour or turn them off or make them turn away from us and kind of avoid us, because every time they see us, we're telling them something they did wrong, or something they still need to do, or something they didn't do at the time that we decided they need to do it. And she actually talks about what her husband did. When she started nagging, he would become like a deaf man. He would not hear her. He would not respond. And then at some stage, he told her, simply because you kept nagging, I decided not to do it. And although that might not be the most mature response, I can't really see a different way for the man to react, just given the circumstances. I think that perhaps there would be a better way to react, maybe sitting down and saying, listen, I have this and this and this and this and this on my list, but this channel is for women. So we are trying to make the situation as good as possible. So we're not going to talk about what the husband should have done, what he ought to have done. No. We will take responsibility for what is ours and leave the responsibility that he has between him and God. So according to psychologist Marabel Morgan says that instead of being a wife to her husband, to him, she started sounding like a mother, and one mother is enough. When we choose to marry, we choose somebody who acts like a man, not somebody who's immature and who never takes any responsibility for anything. That is just not ideal. You don't want that in a marriage, so pick carefully. So she actually said that when she stopped nagging her husband about the dustbin and not taking out the bags, he started doing it, and she never had to ask him again. And she realized that he faithfully takes out the bag when he should. So I think that's also an important lesson for us to learn. She said that she decided to never nag again and that she would rather bite off her tongue. That gives us a good idea of the influence it had on her marriage and the influence it can have on ours. She says that for a man, nagging is worse than being attacked by chickens until you die. Yes, so I don't think we always understand exactly how bad nagging feels. Maybe we had somebody who nagged us and we can have a little bit of comprehension in that area, but this sums it up horribly and very well. And she goes as far as saying that to nag is the opposite of to accept. So she says here, your man is what he is, accept it. There's a lot of women who have teachings on this and pastors, and they say that who your husband is when you are engaged will be who he is when you are married. He will have the same habits, the same attitudes, he will have the same moral inclinations, the beliefs, the same religion that he had before. There are very, very, very few examples of men who radically change, but that's very, very rare and almost unheard of. And they do change in small ways, but who they are in essence basically remains the same. And that's also important for us to know, that we won't be better just because we said I do. I do have a video on that as well. The Bible tells us to reverence our husbands. That's a type of awe. So you look at who he is and you learn to find the good, because there is good if you chose well. Hopefully you didn't choose somebody who's not trustworthy, who's lazy, and sometimes those things can happen. Maybe he can go through a bad time and you can help him through that. But if that's his character, if that's just who he is, he's been like that for years, you're not going to change him. So choose somebody you can live with. Choose somebody that has the type of flaws that won't drive you so insane that you would want to run away and constantly nag. So it is important to choose carefully and also to make peace with some things, because we'll never have it perfect. We will never have a perfect husband. There will always be something that has the ability to drive us insane, but that's our decision. We, at some stage, we allowed ourselves to let that thing get to us. And it is our responsibility to let it go as well. To acknowledge the fact that this thing irritates me, but I am not subject to my emotions. I'm not subject to how something makes me feel. I'm responsible, rather, for how I react, and I'm going to take this thought captive and bring it under the subjection of Christ. I'm going to say to this thing, you don't have the power over me. You don't have the power over my emotions and my responses and my reactions. I am going to choose to love my husband despite of this thing, and I'm going to teach myself to make peace with this. And there is a neuroscientist or a surgeon, a brain surgeon and brain specialist, Dr. Caroline Leaf, actually says that this is possible. You can convince yourself that you like somebody that you didn't like previously, because you have pathways in your brain that follows certain thoughts that you built over time, and some of them can be negative. So when you see this person, immediately you have a negative response to them. And the same can be said for our triggers. So we have to learn to say, I'm going to train my brain to react and respond and think differently about this thing. It might take a lot of time, but eventually you can get there. Don't allow something like a door that's left open to bother you. Just go to the door and close it and say, oh, my husband left it open again, I'll help him, and close it. What takes more effort? Walking to your husband and saying, listen, you left the door open again. Would you just please stop leaving the door open? Can you just learn not to do this anymore? It's really frustrating. I keep walking into the door, and every time I enter the house, it looks so dirty. This is what we do, and we don't always realize that we do this. Instead, just close the door and go on with your day. Don't let something that small have an influence or have a say. And of course, when there are character flaws, that's a different story. When we're talking about sin, it's a different situation. So we can't apply this to everything. Oh, my husband gets home drunk every night and hits me. Oh, I'm going to help him. I'm going to take the punch. And different situation, completely different situation. If your husband is perhaps sleeping around, or maybe he's having emotional affairs, maybe he is chatting to women online, that's something that we should have limits on. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about little things, character things. Okay, so then she has something very good that she says. It's the man, not the plan. So if your husband has a bad idea, or he has a bad plan, or you can see the results of this plan, I think that it is wise if maybe there's something your husband doesn't know. So let's say he is buying a car from your aunt, and your aunt didn't tell him that she never fixed, let's say, the steering wheel that broke a while ago. I know this is horrible. I'm not a mechanic. I know very little about cars. But you know this fact. And you go to your husband and you say, oh, you know what? I would really like to just tell you that my aunt didn't give you the full truth about the car. This car actually has a flaw that hasn't been fixed yet. That's just normal. That's good. That's healthy. But let's say both of you are working with hypotheticals. So you are looking at the situation and you are sure that it will end up this way. And he's looking at the situation and he's sure that it will end up this way. There's really no way to know for some things. You know, sometimes there is very obvious things. Like if your husband has an affair, the marriage will suffer. That's a no-brainer. So when we are married, we are supposed to support our husbands. Now, if we married a man that has any wisdom at all, he would take the time to listen to what his wife has to say, because she is his helper, not just the cleaner in the house. So she has something to offer. If your husband is not open to this, then this is a different situation, something that has to be handled very differently. He probably needs counseling. He probably has some chauvinistic ideas and some suppressed ideas. Yes, but a wife is not supposed to be just silent. That is not what I'm saying. But if he makes a plan and you don't agree with the plan, and it's just hypotheticals, or maybe you just have this feeling, he might have a feeling too, and it's very difficult to decide whose feeling is the right one. So the best thing you can do is to support him. And the chances are, if he has your support, he might actually succeed, but retract your support, and that situation might not work out. The one thing that might be needed for his plan to work is your support, your courage, and just your belief in him, trusting him. And maybe it might be not the best idea ever, but it won't ruin your life. It's not sin. It's just maybe something that you wouldn't have done it that way. Support him. And when he makes a mistake, step in and see how you can help. It's your life. So the two of you are building it together, and God called the husband to be the leader. So what we want to do is we want to say, you know what, I really can't support your plan. Doesn't look right. Here's my reasons. And you say, yes, I hear your reasons, but I don't agree with them. And these are my reasons. And I'm still going to go with this plan. Then we say, you know what, I am going to support you. I'm going to respect you and jump into this because I'm your wife. And I love you. I don't love your plan. Once again, we're not talking about sin. Never about sin. We don't submit to a sinful situation. If your husband is hitting you, you are submitting to sin if you stay. So that's something that you should flee from. We even see in the Old Testament that if the Christians were persecuted, especially if the people who were giving the gospel, they fled. They went from that region. So I can give you many reasons for why it is a good idea to get out of a situation where your husband is being violent and he's being abusive. That is sin. We're not supposed to be subject to his sinful ways. So if our husband tells us to hit somebody, we're not going to hit them. And if our husband says, sit still, I'm going to hit you, you better run. So I think that's very important for us to remember this. So this is completely different. We're talking about normal things, normal behaviors, normal flaws, but anyway, talking about something completely different. And in the next video, we will be talking about admiring him. And I think that if we are still trying to change him, the second will be impossible because we won't be looking at him with the right lenses. So we will be maybe looking at him and focusing on his mistakes, his errors, things that still need fixing, still need changing. This is the image that I want, and this is what he has to offer. So how can I ever accept him? And then how can I ever admire him? I'd go as far as to say it's impossible to admire him if you don't first accept him. So I hope that this video was helpful to you. If you have any questions and comments, please leave them below. And if you found this video useful or helpful, please click the like and subscribe button. And I hope to see you in the next video when I continue with the second part of the 4 A's by Marabel Morgan in her book Total Woman.